Lloyd.
So, Brexit. We're here to talk about that. It's been coming up 3 weeks since the referendum. Everything's changed in the British government and currencies are up and they're down.
Yeah, I mean, it's been an interesting 3 weeks. I don't know about you, but I felt addicted to the news that we've been getting every day. It seems like every day there's a new piece of news. You know, the dynamics are all changing. And yes, I mean, certainly the first week of Brexit, you know, nobody seemed to do anything at all. Nobody was moving forward with any transactions. But, you know, since then, we've really seen a lot of, you know, almost all of our clients have continued to proceed. And so that's obviously been a good sign. And then I guess the even better signal which we've just got is that Theresa May is now going to be the new Prime Minister, and that's come about 2 months ahead of the original schedule. And that's why I think we're seeing the currency start to lift up from their lows, and it's starting to look like a good situation.
Yeah, definitely. I think, well, why is it that your clients have stuck with their purchases? What is the main reason? You know, it's because currency levels have dropped. Especially for pound. For dollar buyers, it's actually got better. And of course, if you're in Europe, it hasn't changed at all. But for British buyers, why are they sticking with their purchases so far?
I think it comes down to a couple of reasons, but you know, one of the reasons would be that it generally takes about 3 months to purchase a French property, and by a certain stage, you're already more or less locked in to the purchase. So you, in terms of, well, you can still walk away from the purchase if you wanted to, but then you may be in a position where you would lose your deposit. So I think a lot of people are continuing on the basis that they were there already. A lot of them will have purchased their currency at a reasonable rate prior to that. So I think most people have got themselves ready to purchase, and so the existing clients are all moving forward just because they were organised to do so and they wanted the French property. In terms of new applications, we're still seeing, you know, decent levels of people interested. It's true that there have been a few less Brits than usual, but it's certainly, you know, certainly seen a lot of interest still coming from the expat centres, such as Singapore or Dubai, and also in the States. So the English buyers and British buyers are still there as well, but obviously they're still taking their time a little bit as they kind of adjust to see where the certainty is going to come from.
It's quite interesting, really, because you know it's about short-term risk management against long-term uncertainty. You know, we don't know at the moment where things are going to be tax-wise and visa-wise in 2 years. Nobody does, not even the government that will move in shortly.
Yeah, and in which taxes do you mean in terms of the uncertainty?
Well, things like capital gains tax. You know, we may still be in the EEA, we'll be coming out of the EU, but we're likely to remain in the EEA, the
European Economic Area. Yeah.
European Economic Area. And you know, so it's hard to say what things will change.
I don't think that much is going to change, really. I mean, currently, if you own currently the fact is that we're still in the European Union, and so I mean, not much has changed on that level for now. In terms of the dual taxation agreements between the two countries, you know, if we're just talking about France, it's not the tax relationship, the double taxation agreement is not dependent on our membership of the EU. In fact, it's just an agreement between France and the UK, and so those laws are unlikely to change. So unless France makes a change towards all non-European people, there's going to be no change for British buyers if we do come out. So I think, in fact, the tax situation is not going to change at all. I mean, just to say a couple more words on that. In fact, generally, you know, although the things like capital gains tax reduce over a long time in France, so you might start off at, you know, from year 5 to year 15 until approximately year 20, it does change with each government. Effectively, the capital gains tax reduces down to 0 anyway. So the capital gains tax which you're actually going to be paying in the end is still going to be the capital gains tax in the UK. So it's actually, the capital gains tax is only really, the only one that you really have to focus on is what the UK tax situation is. The French tax situation is a little bit of a red herring for capital gains tax. Then when you look at income tax, there are social charges and things like that which you have to take into consideration. but it's still fairly favourable overall, and we just have to see how that's going to evolve. And
Favourable, how is that? Due to the rates specifically that
Yeah,
are
I mean,
underpinning the market?
the thing which you have to look at the moment, the double taxation agreement, as far as I know, relates to income tax. So if you get some income in France, it gets taxed, let's say, at approximately 20% in France, and then you have the income come into the UK, and then UK income tax will apply to the amount less whatever you've paid in France. The only difference, in something which is still an evolving situation, is how the French social charges, which I think to amount to around 15%, are going to be taken into consideration going forward. So that's one thing to check with your accountant, and also depends how you set it up, whether you're purchasing the property in a company and things like that. So there's certain things to look at with that when buying in France.
And what about supply and demand, John? In our areas that are popular with our clients, like Paris, the south of France and the French Alps, supply and demand comes into play quite a lot. You have a few rare new builds launching every month, and in some locations 1 or 2 every year, if that. So opportunities that are arising or unavailable now won't be there. They'll be sold to other European clients. So how will that affect the market?
Well, I think that's one of the places where we're still seeing a lot of interest and sales going through. So if we take, for example, the development which you recently launched in Saint-Martin-de-Belleville, we saw that a good number, or good percentage, perhaps 50% or 60%, were sold very, very quickly to British buyers for the main part, as far as we saw in terms of the financing. And that's the one thing where any uncertainty or potential uncertainty over what things will look like in the future for the relationship between the UK and France is really overshadowed and overtaken by that desire for people to own property in that specific location. So I think where the market might be slower in places where the property isn't necessarily available, but if you've been waiting for 5 years or 10 years for a new build property or a property of that kind of spec in Saint-Martin and it becomes available, then you buy it. Likewise, a fantastic renovation project somewhere in the 7th in Paris, or potentially somewhere in Cannes or Saint-Tropez. If the projects are available, I think people are willing to still proceed and to go ahead, especially if they feel that they might lose out to people who are earning dollars currently.
And what advice would you give to international buyers buying French property around mortgages, mortgage rates and currencies? And what I mean is, in the last 3 weeks, British buyers have lost 11 cents on their pound, but US dollar buyers have become 24% better off over the last 2 years. So there's some big disparities in the purchasing power of different nationalities. So how are international buyers using mortgage rates to control the risk and the value in their purchases in France at the moment?
Well, I think one of the facts about the French mortgage market is that 70% of buyers in France are British. And so obviously they have seen since July last year, as you will know from the newsletter, they've seen a reduction in or rather an increase in the cost of their deposit of roughly 20%. So this is significant, but perhaps not that significant again if we're talking about buying your dream property. So I think the numbers we looked at for a property, let's say a purchase price of 500,000, was that we saw about a £13,000 increase versus July last year for your 100,000 deposit, assuming an 80% loan to value. So 100,000 euros is now costing you £13,000 more than it did previously. However, since July last year, rates have dropped quite significantly, let's say in the region of 20% as well. So we're now getting something like a fixed rate at 2.15, whereas previously we were getting, in July last year, a fixed rate of 2.7%. And so the reduction of that, your total interest bill over the life of the ownership of the property has actually then decreased as well by the order of, let's say, 20 odd thousand euros. So if you take the difference between those two, the numbers which we came up with were that if you were to look at the investment, assuming no changes in interest rates, which you get with a French mortgage over the term, and no changes in currency rates, then you would actually be £7,000 better off. Now, obviously there are going to be changes, slight differences in the eventual rates or the loan to values, but you can still see the fact that you have these incredible, unbelievably low fixed rates of interest in France. Those are the drivers of long-term value, and whilst there may be some recession, or I wouldn't necessarily say recession, but whilst economic growth is going to be potentially hampered until we get an agreement, long-term you have to think based on all of the quantitative easing which is going on in the EU, where they're printing this money, that this money eventually has to make its way into real assets. And so at some point over that 20-year period, you will get some quite strong increases in the value of the assets which you're buying. So long term, fixing your interest rate in and around 2% has got, for 20 years, has to be a good option.